frame is inequality. So, to put at the heart of the statement that history education has proven time and time again to be a source of civic engagement to improve the quality of life for all Americans who suffer from tremendous inequality. So essentially taking the indisputable fact that America is in a moment of historical inequality. I mean, we'd have to go back to the 19th century to reproduce levels of inequality today. And then the question is, so if we can agree, right, because there are those, call them plutocrats, if you like, who would disagree. But I think in terms of the constituencies necessary to support something like this, you're not going to get that much pushback. You know, it's not going to be too politically charged to say that this work is about the problem of inequality. And what is the relationship between that problem and historical literacy, of cultural understandings, essentially political, you know, how do we claim to be a country whose greatest gift is democracy, predicated on opportunity, that finds itself at a moment of tremendous inequality? How did that happen? And one of the responses to that is that a citizenry disengaged from his own history didn't know what to fight and defend.
Can you say that again?
No, I can't actually.
Disengaged
From its own history, didn't know what to fight and defend. So that we trade on, you know, and here again, I'm going to retreat back to the trees for me because these examples are so prominent in my mind, but you'll all have to hold constant that big idea about inequality. But to me, you know, so you could use labor movement as a classic example. So at some point, the labor movement in the context of the Reagan era became the worst thing that ever happened to America. No surprise we are where we are, right? Or that the notion that a renewed labor movement, a la Bill de Blasio and his $7 billion arrears to the current public workers of New York City, is partly a consequence of a set of tax decisions over the last 30 years where we said we want wealthy people to keep more of their money. And we don't have enough to fix our roads or keep the salt piles sufficient, or to educate our kids, or if we're going to try education reform, we're going to cheat by sticking charter schools in buildings where they don't pay. I mean, you know, you could name all the ways in which we have accommodated a set of tax policies that are at root the cause of that inequality. Now, the difference is that the corporations will say, here I'm back in the trees, but bear with me for a minute, because I think this is all history informing the analysis, right? Mm-hmm. So you could say that, well, globalization created an economic incentive for American manufacturers to seek cheaper labor. But that does not, by definition, mean that those same corporations have to pay their CEOs or their management classes as much money as they do. Mm-hmm. So you could still literally export. Now that causes a problem, but the problem of taxing those companies creates a different problem, right? You're compounding two problems. So in my fantasy world of, you know, sitting at the table and the President of the United States says, so all right, Khalil, you've got all the answers, what's it going to be? And I say, issue an ultimatum to every company in America, right? So you question of what is an American. And you say, if you want to be an American company, if you want to go to bed at night saying, I'm a good American, then you have to pay your people more. And guess what? You can't run to the nearest state because it's a race to the bottom for every state, as Cuomo is now engaging in Rick Perry type policies of, you know, no taxes for the next 10 years. New York State is welcome, you know, welcome for business. Or this notion that the minimum wage is the increase is gonna lose jobs. Well, say, okay, that's a hiccup, right? But a new baseline means that when you work, you have a quality of life. So all of these questions trade on notions that we've wrestled with for a long time. And the simple fact is that if we really want to wrestle with inequality, if we could imagine a critical mass of Americans rallying around inequality in the context of historical education, then we would at least better understand how we got in this mess, and we would have some sense of how to get out of it. because letting Boeing shop between Seattle or Illinois or Utah, for the lowest dollar because the employees have demanded too much, is a consequence of a set of decisions at the top that said that those companies need to keep as much money because that's their right, or that the companies need to buy into the political system. So again, those are all symptoms of the problem, and we're all familiar with them. But each one of them, so freedom of contract under Brandeis in 1905 was a lesson learned about the implicit power that corporations have over individuals. So individuals don't, by definition, are not equal parties to employment contract because they have to work, right, to eat. But a Republican vision of America, or a vision of America today, is predicated on universal employment, not because everybody actually has a job that actually can pay you, but on a world without minimum wages. You're literally looking at starvation or anything that somebody will pay you, which is better than nothing, which is essentially the model of the third world or developing countries, because for every dollar more, every marginal dollar they make more above the dollar they didn't make 10 years ago, improves their quality of life. But again, you can only see these things. You don't have to have a PhD in American history to see them for what they are, but that's the danger, I think, to the plutocrats. The danger to the plutocrats is that we don't want people walking around making all these connections, and then instead of we're going to give you your taxes back to the folks in Kansas, who are you can keep my taxes as long as we have great schools, as long as I have a decent job and I don't have potholes that I'm running over every day. All right, I'm done. But inequality as a framework, as a universalizing problem that is infinitely diagnosable, right, in the language and the evidence that we all have access to, and then to ask the question, can history help us to understand inequality better and to help our children that we teach have a better sense of what it means to be an American, which I would submit doesn't mean being a plutocrat, which is essentially what we are teaching our kids to be.
I have to say this because not only was that amazing, but it also makes the point. We think about this in terms of New York and teaching here. So Khalil's given us this great breakdown of how this is played out, and his frame of reference for all of us in the city of New York who teach New York school children is Lochner versus New York, the case that challenged the notion of liberty to contract. Now, if I don't have the freedom as a teacher because of Common Core or whatever, to be able to engage my students in a larger question about what it means to be an American, core democratic values and liberty to contract challenged in this city, because this city literally, and this would be true of Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, any urban center. In fact, I would submit any community, but your urban centers in particular, you can teach all of American history through the landscape of the history of that community. And Khalil just did it for us very powerfully in the city of New York. So there's all these ways that we can bring all these things together, but it's making the case that we have to reimagine to a certain degree what historical literacy means and the process of redefining what an American is and what it is that we hope to teach or communicate about what the core of American values are. The National Council for the Social Studies, going back to your point, Jenny, which was a really good one, has these core democratic values for elementary students, and they're culled from the Declaration of Independence and the preamble. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. If those are our core conversations about fairness, and we teach history around those things, then we are meeting both the conservative demands of, well, when we say what it means to be American, it means, ticking these certain boxes about knowledge of these documents, but also the demand of folks who are saying, but we want to live up to what those things say, not simply know what they mean, but actually live up to the values that they impart. And I think it was really powerful to see you do that in that context, and for us to maybe think around a model of historical literacy that would demand fairness and equality, be engaged with these larger civic questions, but also force people to think about the ways in which their own communities have been the battleground of this fight for fairness and justice across time.